to the second spring DPD lunch. Thanks for coming in. Today we have Dr. Patti Watkins. She is in the School of Psychological Sciences, right? And for the past several years, she's been working in the area of fat studies, which is an emerging area that's coming out of women's studies. Is that correct? And Patti spent some time having her academic home be in women's studies. She started here in psychology, moved to women's studies, is back to psychology. So she's really
it's like ping pong.
Yeah, well, aware of issues in both fields and has brought this together. So she's going to talk today about weightism and how you can bring this topic into your classes. And I think it's something in the DPE area that hasn't been talked about a lot. We haven't, I don't know that it's in a lot of courses, size and body shape and that kind of thing. And it's a very relevant topic. So very happy to have Patti with us today.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. You pretty much covered my first slide there. Before I get started talking about fat studies, I have a little commercial message which I was mentioning. I've got photos of me up there doing active things because that's one of the messages I try to get out. One important message is that you can be fit and fat. I'm technically obese according to the BMI, and our PERS, our insurance wants me, our health engagement model wants me to lose weight to get healthy, but I'm already healthy. So we'll maybe think about the hem situation as we talk about all of this too. But I bike with a local bike club, and I just wanted to let people know about an event that we have going on next Wednesday. Especially if you're a bicyclist and want to show your support, it's the Ride of Silence. I'll pass those around. It's to honor the people. It's a national event, but the bike club sponsoring the local version of it, which honors people in the community that have been killed or injured severely by motor vehicle accidents. And I know there's a young woman who died a few years back whose mother works at OSU. And actually, I don't know if anybody knew Jane Higdon, who worked at the Linus Pauling Institute, was killed on a bike ride about 5 years ago, I think. And retired OSU professor, you may have read in the Gazette-Times, I think the accident was in January and he died more recently from his injuries. So we meet at the Aquatic Center at 6:30 and honor those folks and then ride in silence in mass to make a statement to the community and the motorists to please be careful and remember there are cyclists that they need to share the road with. So that's my little commercial message there. It's next Wednesday evening, Wednesday the 19th. There's a little flyer. And there's another event described on the back about bicycle and pedestrian legal clinic that's on the 17th. But on next Wednesday evening is the Ride of Silence. Okay, enough with my commercial message. So Michelle did a good job introducing me. I'm a clinical health psychologist by training and was hired in 1993 to the psych department here. And around 2000, I migrated over to women's studies, which really gave me this systems of oppression outlook on the work that I was doing with respect to eating disorders and body image. And just last spring, I moved back to the psych department, which is now the School of Psychological Science. But I get to have the best of both worlds now because the two classes I developed while in women's studies, women, weight, and body image, and fat studies, are now cross-listed between those two disciplines. So a little bit about my approach, and this is basically what I learned during my time in women's studies. Actually, when I first moved over to women's studies, I took over one year when Susan Shaw was on sabbatical teaching her Systems of Oppression class. And Systems of Oppression basically reviewed all of the areas of difference in which some people are privileged and others are oppressed. And we typically talk about sexism and racism, heterosexism, classism, ageism. ableism. I also taught one of the intro classes, Women's Studies 224, that touches on all of those. But one thing that seemed to be missing from the curriculum was addressing oppression and privilege based on body weight, shape, and size. And actually, in women's studies, until I developed fat studies that I taught for the first time last spring, there were actually then specialty courses that had been taught on those other areas. Women of color class, and Corinne probably knows the titles, the LGBTQ class. So I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity and the support of the folks in women's studies to develop a whole class around the issue of weightism, or oppression based on people's BMIs, or anytime your physical appearance exceeds the societal standards, your weight exceeds the societal beauty standards. So weightism basically is a system that facilitates privilege and oppression based on random variations. It's like where people are born this way. They're born differently in terms of their body shape and size. There are genetic influences on that. Body weight, shape, and size are not malleable, as people suggest they are. And variations in supposed personal attractiveness. Of course, standards for attractiveness have changed over time, and they differ across culture, and they're basically pretty arbitrary. And then I emphasize a supposed connection to poor health status. And I don't have time in here to review all of the literature, but certainly contact me. I can give you specific references. But body weight, shape, and size is not exactly correlated with health status. And dieting to lose weight does not make you healthier. And in fact, dieting to lose weight has a whole host of health problems associated with it. But weightism, this poster is, I don't know if you've seen these, the state of Georgia started a campaign, an anti-obesity prevention program targeting children. And so warning, it's hard to be a little girl if you're not. And this is an example of the kind of shaming that these sorts of campaigns do, that bring on, that might actually increase weightism. And we'll look at some countermeasures in a little bit. But imagine being a fat kid and having that poster, seeing that poster on your way to school every day. Okay, and the criticism and the teasing that might bring on if you are a fat child. Okay, so I have I shared with Michelle an article by Linda Bacon on thin privilege that you may have read, but if not, it's on the DPD website, right? And I share that in my classes, Fat Studies in Women, Weight, and Body Image. It's a kind of a parallel or a takeoff on Peggy McIntosh's original article about white privilege, unpacking the knapsack. And so Peggy talks about some things she can do as a white person, buying and renting a house. Your neighbors will probably be nice to you. If you behave badly or rudely, it's not attributed to your race. And you can buy posters, dolls, magazines where people look like you. And you can choose public accommodation without being treated badly, and can get medical help and be treated well. And if you're a fat person, Linda Bacon's pointed out some things as a thin person, that the privileges that she has. But going back to Peggy McIntosh, actually it's perfectly legal to discriminate against people based on their body weight, shape, and size in most places in the US. So you may be denied renting or buying a house. Your neighbors may not be nice to you. They may make fun of you because of your body size or shun you in some way. If you do something, oh gosh, if you're seen eating a hamburger, people will be like, all fat people are, you know, pigs and slobs. So it's attributed to your body weight, shape, and size. And think about it. Think about Barbie dolls and child's toys and the images, the models you see in magazines and in movies. They're not, you don't see people that look like you. You see very thin women. And if you're a fat person and try to ride a bus or an airplane, you will get dirty looks when you try to sit down in the seat, like these desks that are too small for you. And people may be outright rude to you. And there's a great literature about weight bias in medical settings. So you may go to the physician and face some scorn and derision there from the medical personnel. And then Linda Bacon points out these other things, having greater career opportunities. There's a research literature that fat people, especially women, make less money than thin people. And you may be aware of Southwest Airlines policy that if you exceed a certain body size, you have to pay for a second seat on an airplane, which thin people don't have to do. You can go, as a thin person, go into a store, find clothing, fashionable clothing that fits you, and that you're treated with respect by the salespeople. Such is not the case if you're a fat person. Have a greater dating pool, and being respected and listened to when you talk about weightism. When fat people talk about weight bias and weightism and isn't this a problem, often the feedback is, oh, you're like if somebody, a person of color, were talking about racism, it's like, oh, you're just whining about something that really, you know, it's your problem, not ours. So Linda Bacon, I'll introduce you there, is a nutritionist and a great ally as a thin woman who speaks out against weight bias. And this particular poster is addressing these childhood obesity campaigns. This is a response to the state of Georgia's campaign. So she stands against fighting childhood obesity because those programs are stigmatizing. Stigma equals bad medicine. And she's got a book that, some books are going around for show and tell, and one of them is Health at Every Size. Okay, that actually explains the idea and the research behind it that you can be healthy despite being overweight or obese, as I am and as others are. Okay, so some sources of weight bias. Institutionally, we get these messages through the media, through medicine, employment, housing, education. And I highlight here, you know, I made this slide, actually, this one, I talked in the medical humanities program. Actually, Michelle went there to my talk there in winter term. And it was before Michelle Obama was invited to be our graduation speaker. And, you know, one of the problems with the Let's Move program, it's great, the focus on health is great, and the behaviors that she promotes, like physical activity and eating fresh grown vegetables, but it's like, why do you have to say this is for obese people, obese kids, and single out the obese kids? Why not health for everybody at all sizes? And that would be less stigmatizing. So if I had an audience with Michelle, which I'm sure I won't get when she comes here, I would talk with her about this. And in fact, some of the researchers, the scholars I'm talking about here, have written to her to no avail to try to get her to see the stigmatizing effects of when you target obesity. Because people can't change their body weight, shape, and size necessarily. You can improve your health through better health behaviors, but your body weight, shape, and size doesn't necessarily change. So these are other, there's a chapter in the Fat Studies Reader that's coming around about the Trim and Fit program in Singapore that was discontinued because of the stigmatizing effect it had on the fat children who, it was a mandatory program from kindergarten through high school in Singapore that singled out all the fat kids for basically fat camp, regimented exercise and restrictive dieting. And actually, I'm an author on it. It was a student's thesis in medical anthropology here a few years ago. So that's what the TAF program. This is an Australian program that has some stigmatizing effects. This is one of the quotes from, when I last taught Women, Weight, and Body Image, I asked the students if I could collect their reading reaction responses for data, for qualitative data, and they all agreed. They loved having their stories told, and this is an encounter one of the students had with the legal system, just to illustrate what happens that probably wouldn't happen to a thin person. So there are few legal protections against weight bias, and these are some places where there are laws against discrimination on body weight, shape, and size. Sandra Solovey is a lawyer who has written this book, Tipping the Scales of Justice, if you're more interested on the legalities of it. I don't know who I'm talking to in the audience with your different disciplines, but I'm hoping that I've got resources that span the humanities and the social and behavioral health sciences that'll pop up here. So interpersonally, we, in our individual interactions with each other, translate those messages we get from the institutional level. And so teasing and criticism and name-calling and even advice, well-meaning advice about body weight, shape, and size can really impact people adversely. And it comes from, I don't know if any of you, I've had the experience, Fred Myers, at the checkout line, the cashier commenting on, do you know how many calories are in those pot pies, those Marie Callender pot pies? Like, look at you and you're going to eat that. So it happens all the time. It happens all the time, and you yourselves may have experienced it. So these are some of the effects. Why is it so bad, weight bias? Why do we care? And it results in body image disorders, anxiety, low self-esteem, self-blame. And then it has, you know, if we're doing it in the name of health, oh, we've got to shame those fatties into exercising and getting healthier, what actually has the effect of having people avoid physical activity and medical visits. And my students always tell me about interactions at Dixon. They hate Dixon because of the social comparison about bodies and the comments. And I've used it on occasion. I usually swim at Osborne in the community. But one time, the last time I went there, there were young women on the scale, like comparing themselves to each other. And it's like, oh, damn, you lost more weight than I did. And all about the weight focus. So if you're not extremely thin, you kind of feel like something's wrong with you. Suicide is actually one of the consequences. And this link here, and you all have the PowerPoints available through the DPD site, is to an article by Marilyn Wan, who's a fat activist and the creator of the Yay scale, where she writes about bullycide, about kids that have recently, and you may have heard about them in the news, kill themselves as a result of weight-based teasing. And in our day and age with electronic media, the social media, wow, yeah, I probably wouldn't have survived adolescence if I'd been bombarded from all sources. But a lot of this is, you know, happening through Facebook, sites like Facebook. It's not just face-to-face at school, but it follows you home and onto your computer. So some quantitative studies, and I've got a link to a place where you can access these articles. They come from researchers at the Yale Rudd Center, and they do weight bias research. And these are large-scale studies, and one suggests that this weight bias and discrimination has increased big time over the last decade or so, which kind of coincides with this war on obesity and the obesity crisis that we have going on. And that indeed people reported weight bias and discrimination to be on par with bias based on race. And talking about intersections in your classes, your class may not be all about weight, but you could talk about intersections with gender and race and other areas of difference. So indeed, the study showed that weight bias is greater for women, and especially women of color are targeted. And the funny thing about gender is that women at a BMI of 27, which is 2 points into your overweight range, according to the government, that's the point in which they really start to experience weight bias. But for men, they don't experience it till a BMI of 35, which is a couple categories into the obese range. So women really are held to, I'm probably telling you nothing new, but the research supports held to a higher standard. And some people suggest, and weight bias is being called now by people, the Yale behavioral health researchers, as a social justice issue, as it has been by fat activists for years and people doing DPD kinds of work. And weight bias does intersect with other areas of difference. I've got a picture here of Dr. Bianca Wilson, who's a community health psychologist and the author of a chapter in the Fat Study Reader that's going around. And her chapter, as many of the chapters in there, highlight intersections of weightism with other areas of difference. Her chapter's on fat, black, lesbian, and bisexual health disparities. Now, I have to tell you, as an aside, when students in fat studies last spring read that chapter, in the chapter, she identifies herself as a member of that group. They questioned her credibility. And yeah, and it's like they were enacting the weight bias in class that they're reading about. And I'm like, you know, what if she were a normal weight white male talking about this? And I really have to bring them back to the literature on bias in psychology. And might you be doing the same sort of thing? So it was quite interesting. So the fat studies class, fat studies is a new discipline that is an offshoot of women's studies and actually has been compared akin to queer studies. In fact, the folks in this field are attempting to reclaim the word fat, much as the word queer has been reclaimed. And many of the people who are the instigators of the fat studies field, like Esther Rothblum, are actually lesbians themselves, fat lesbians. And Esther had done work for years, research on bias based on sexual orientation, and more recently began to look at those interactions. So frames it as a social justice issue and actually talks about, you know, discrimination based on weight is one of the it's like the last socially acceptable form of bias. Like we can make fat jokes left and right. We have whole movies and TV shows making fun of fat people, and you know, people don't blink an eye about it. Whereas in this day and age, you can't do that, make jokes about people of color or gays and lesbians without that being, you know, some kind of social censure for doing that overtly. But fat, it's like fair game. And some people say, the fat studies researchers, and there's a book going around by Amy Farrell called Fat Shame. She also articulates this quite well, that that weight bias is a proxy for bias based on other forms of difference, like women, and the people who are larger in our society are women and people of color and poor people. So this is a way to slam those groups without really doing it overtly. And actually lesbians weigh more than as a group than straight women. So fat studies, some of the other tenets here, promotes size acceptance of oneself, one's own body image, but also to watch your weight bias interactions with other people. And then questions your traditional models of health. And I'll just put up this first. There are a couple more health at every size slides, but I'm cognizant of my time. But basically, this is an alternative to the weight loss at all costs model of health, which most of us adhere to, which is the mainstream view, which is the view that some of my best friends are in public health. But I have to say that the research coming out of our College of Public Health follows a traditional model that high weight is bad and weight loss is the way to cure your health problems. And I know when they invited when Michelle Obama was announced as our graduation speaker, there was an article that says, this is great because she's really, what she's doing with the Let's Move program is so consistent with what we're doing in the College of Public Health. So, is anybody here from the College of Public Health? See, I wish they were.
They wouldn't raise their hands anyway.
So this is the shame of it. I'm preaching to the choir here, that I'd like these messages to permeate into the health field. And there are certainly people, as we'll see, researchers, that it's not just some yahoo from the humanities saying this. And I say that affectionately. I'm kidding about that. But if they think, oh, the humanities, what do they know? Well, there are actually people in this field who promote health at every size, including Linda Bacon, who's a nutritionist by training, that are saying these things. Okay, so weight may correlate but not cause disease and early mortality. In fact, dieting and yo-yo dieting has the weight cycling has been shown to be the thing that causes disease and early mortality. That people with a history of yo-yo dieting are less healthy and die sooner than people who were at a larger weight and stayed that way. No. And dieting makes you fatter too. And people, I have this whole other set of slides with references. But the process of dieting, you end up weighing more than you did in the first place. Okay. So here, just thinking about how you might integrate fat studies information, I want to give you some resources and point you to names in the field that you might access. And I've got some of their disciplines up here. So Esther Rothblum, she's the one of the editors. She, along with Sandra Solovey, the lawyer, are the editors of the Fat Studies Reader, like the first book that addresses this field. And her background's clinical psychology, like mine, though she worked in a psych department for years, but now is in women's studies at San Diego State University. And Samantha Murray's my Australian fat studies buddy. She is in critical and cultural studies. She, along with myself and Amy Farrell, and Heather Brown, who taught a one-time fat studies course, we're the only people I could find, and you'll read in the other study that Michelle's got attached to the DPD website, that have taught an actual full-fledged fat studies class. So there's a fat studies conference in New Zealand in July that Samantha Murray's the keynote speaker, and I hope to meet her there. Marilyn Wan describes herself as a free-range fat activist. I don't know I don't think she has an advanced degree. I don't know what her college background is, but she is like one of the brightest, most articulate people I've met, and brave. She's written a book, Fat So, because you don't have to apologize for your size. And that's Marilyn front and center there at this protest about weight loss surgery. And she's come up with the Yay scale. And Amy Farrell, if you get a chance, she appeared on the Colbert Report. So you can call that up and look at that. But she actually was on a few years earlier, and he kind of dismissed her and made fat jokes. But on this one from last spring, Colbert is a little more serious and sensitive and lets her speak her mind without undercutting her. So this is her book, Fat Shame. That's another great resource. So just to show you other folks in the field, Abigail Sagai is a sociologist, and that link to her website, she's actually got whole PDF articles. She writes about the obesity crisis as moral panic, and she's analyzed newspaper reports, the kind of reporting, the sensationalized reporting of findings related to obesity and the minimization and absence of those research that counters the mainstream view. Glenn Gesser is an exercise physiologist. He wrote the book Big Fat Lies. Paul Ernsberger, nutrition, neuroscience background. Paul Campus is the author of The Obesity Myth. He's a lawyer. Eric Oliver, if we have anybody from political science, that's his background, wrote Fat Politics. And Michael Gard from sports science and gender studies, The End of the Obesity Epidemic. So regardless of discipline, there's something you can find related to your discipline most likely that might address this. Then other resources, website resources, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance is certainly a good one. That organization has been around for a long time. Then I like, and I've shown to my students in Psychology Today, which is like the layperson's version from the American Psych Association kind of blog, I Take Up Space. There are articles about various topics and fat studies that are easy to read and relatable. The Health at Every Size website, Association for Size, Diversity, and Health has got a lot of resources, including the research references behind Health at Every Size. And then I mentioned the Yale Rudd Center Weight Bias website. And they've got videos to illustrate website. They've got training programs to try to get professional audiences to reduce their weight bias interactions. And this I love, and I'm going to try to bring up the website. So this happened just in the last few months as a response to that Georgia campaign with the posters of the fat kids and the demeaning captions. This is a grassroots effort to come up with these posters, I stand against weight bias, in various ways, shapes, and forms. And I put these three up here because they illustrate, many of these illustrate intersections of weight and other areas of difference. And it's like, does this sound familiar? Where have I heard that before? So let me see if I can call it up. And some of them are more, health science related, and some of them are more, see, that happens when I try to do.
Can you open a browser and just copy paste?
I think if I, oops. You think? I don't even know what a browser is. The E? Oh, look. This always happens. Now, did I get rid of it?
No, so it's the top. Yeah, and then to the left of that tab, just click that one.
Okay. There, thank you. When I do this in class, I always say to my students, I grew up with a black and white TV with 3 channels. We had to get up and physically turn them. So anyway, here there are over 200 of these, and some of them are from professionals like Linda Bacon. Others are just from regular people. And we saw that one. I find them so uplifting for learning to love your body for what it is and not hating it for what it is not. I like that one. And there are thin people here and women who meet, and women and men, there's some men, who meet the societal norms of beauty, and I love it that there are allies who speak out. And my favorites, being a health psychologist, clinical health psychologist, are the ones with people engaging in physical activity and showing that fat people are not lazy and physically incompetent, which is one of the stereotypes. And in my class, I mean, one thing that's lacking in books and mainstream media are positive images of fat people. So to try to counter that absence, and a lot of times what you'll see are just the body parts, the objectified body parts. They'll show a fat butt with no head and the fat stomach and not the head of the person, or they're seen from behind. So real dehumanizing sorts of images. So I try to show my students fat people engaged in, you know, physical activity, and smart fat people. I put up the authors, pictures of the authors of their books, and talk about their credentials. I mean, to have a bunch of undergraduate psych students sit there and doubt that woman's credentials, her credibility, and, you know, she's got a PhD in community health psychology. Do you know what that entails? And she's got a tenure track position at this university. And you sit there and then look at her, and there was a lot of resistance. And when you talk about weight, because people are of the assumption that it is malleable and they could just change it if they just tried hard enough or worked hard enough. I like that. I like them all. So I won't go through all 200 with you, but you get an idea. I sit there and look at them. I think they're great. So you can pick and choose which might suit your class best, your purposes, but I think those are a great resource. Okay, where's my slideshow from current slide? Okay, so we had some websites. Now here are some journals you might go to. And the Fat Studies Journal, it's brand new. There's just one issue out so far. And it's, as it says, interdisciplinary. So hopefully people can find something, regardless of your discipline, in there that's relevant. Sex Roles has a special issue that's just come out that's all about fat, the fat body. Has anybody seen any of these? No? Yes, it is exciting. And there's a journal, Soma Technics, that Samantha Murray edits. It's like an Australia-New Zealand one. And it's got a special issue about the fat body. There's actually an article in there called Control Top Underpants, and that Samantha wrote. And so there's some empirical articles, but then there are like some narrative stories. And hers is about, you know, the horror of going to buy underwear. There's nothing that fits, that's nice. And over in the darkened corner, there are some big, ugly, awful, girdly things that are meant to hold you in. And I read that. I wrote to her. I said, that reminds me. My mother used to give me controlled top pantyhose for Christmas every year. It's like, you've brought it all back to me. There was a Health at Every Size journal. Unfortunately, it stopped production in 2006, but this link is to all of the issues and all of the articles there, so you can take a look at that. And then this is especially, I wish for, if we had the public health people in here, a counterpoint in a journal from the health sciences field that presents the empirical data that people can be fit and fat and that diets don't work. So some journal resources. Here's just one example, one of the articles from the Fat Studies Reader. So if you're talking about social justice and human rights, and these are actually Lily O'Hara and Jane Gregg are public health scholars writing about that. And here are films. I love my films. And we have films at the OSU library. Beyond Killing Us Softly is not the Gene Kilborn series. It's kind of stole the name. But what I like about that Gene Kilborn doesn't do, is that there's a big, you know this one, Corinne, the speaker, the lecturer in there is a fat woman. And when she talks about media images of women, she actually has pictures of fat women and addresses the fact that people make fat jokes all the time and how fat people are dehumanized. So I like that as a film about media images. Body, the Value of Women, I just showed, has a whole lot of things, including examples of women who have been affected by weight bias and how that led to their eating disorders. They've got two women in there who are authors and photographers from a book called Women Enlarge, which is a picture book, a photograph book of fat women, nude fat women, like an art kind of book. So there's some fat positive stuff in there. Dieting at War with Our Bodies is a film all about a health at every size intervention as an alternative to traditional dieting. Diet Wars, I think I'm showing tomorrow, is about the negative aspects of weight loss attempts. And Disfigured is a fictional story. Has anybody seen this or heard of it? It's in video stores or Netflix. So it illustrates the trials and tribulations of an overweight, a fat woman, I'll reclaim the word, and a woman with anorexia. And just society's focus on bodies. The size of it follows 4 fat women, about their lives and their deliberations about should I have weight loss surgery and how do I get over or beyond when I go out in public and people say these things to me. And Weightless, I love Weightless, especially because I learned to scuba dive myself recently in the last 3 years. But it's a film about a fat woman scuba diving camp. And it's a great illustration that fat women can be physically competent and they're smart and they're brave and they're all these things. These other 2, you can look at the trailers, they're on my wish list for the library when Jane Nichols is able to get a hold of them.
I have some extra money.
Oh, okay. And get them. No, I think Jane's on them. I think it's just a matter of they're not quite ready for release yet, or they're in the works. And I'll just end with, these are some quotes from my women, weight, and body image class when I did collect data from them, use their responses for data. And there are many more. This is an article that has yet to find a home to be published. But I love this one. It just illustrates that the students did get it and were able to see, view weightism as a social justice issue and recognize that it needs to end and to see it akin to and intersecting with other forms of difference.
I think how you worded that interesting. Personal accounts gave more weight to issues.
Where are we? Oh, good, more weight to issues, yes. Yes. Now, I'll just say a few things I don't have up here about when you try to teach this material. And I know Crin's integrated it into your classes. There was a lot of resistance in the fat studies class. And part of the problem, I wanted women's studies 223 and 224 to be prerequisites so people had a sense of systems of oppression, so now we can plug in weightism. And for some clerical error, that didn't happen. So I got all these people that signed up through psych who hadn't had that class. And so they were not, some of them weren't with it that sexism or racism still exists. So I had a real struggle with the idea of weightism. Somebody wrote in their assignment, I think fat people are disgusting. I'm just taking this class because I need a 4-credit elective to graduate. But throughout the class, it was a struggle at first, but people kind of came around through class discussions. But it is something, and you can read in the article that's about teaching fat studies that Amy Farrell and I both authored, and we talk about our experiences, some of the techniques or the things we did to try to manage that kind of initial reaction. The other thing I think that is important in terms of process is to recognize your own body image issues and don't inadvertently, be talking about, oh, we've got to end fat oppression and feel good about our bodies and then make disparaging statements about your own body or other people's. There's a literature on that happening, like in aerobics classes and exercise classes that are meant to be for health, but what happens is that the instructor is up there talking a lot about appearance and even demeaning their own appearance, or emphasizing people's weight in the class when it's not supposed to be about that. So I know, you know, this is so ingrained in us, and some of the best feminists on campus I've heard, and Corinne knows, she's heard it too, make weight bias remarks, often about themselves, but weight disparaging remarks, because it's so ingrained. So when you're teaching this, you really have to, you know, recognize, I try to be a coping model for them. And that's another thing, the level of disclosure that you do. And I do tell them I had a history of eating disorders. I've been where you are. And look, I've gotten to a point of body acceptance, and I can stand up and say I'm fat and it's all good. And so that's just some of the other, the process variables.
Officially end this since we're past time, but
Okay.
thank you very much, Patty, for
Oh, thank you for coming.